Hello, everyone. My name is Brett Chanco. I teach high school Spanish in Central Virginia, and I want to welcome you to this video, which is about building an in-class reading program in the world language classroom. Just on a personal note, I am in my 10th year teaching Spanish, teaching in public school for about 2/3 of that time, in private school, middle school, and high school. Personally, reading has been an enormous benefit for my second language development, my Spanish development. Over the last couple of years that I've been working with students in class in an independent reading program, I've seen a tremendous amount of growth in their Spanish, in their confidence, in their knowledge, their vocabulary, everything really. So I'm delighted to share my experiences with you, and hopefully you'll be able to enjoy this video. Before I move on, I just want to say that this video is applicable to pretty much any world language teacher, whether you teach elementary, middle, or high school. The only real limitation would be if your students know how to read. So for the real young ones, there might be adaptations that you might need to make for students who aren't reading quite yet. But it doesn't matter if you teach Spanish, Latin, German, French. There are books written for world language students in all of the major languages that are studied in school. So the first question to address is, why build a reading program for your students in class? Hopefully you've already answered that question since you're watching this video, but if you're just flirting with the idea, or if you've heard some colleagues talk about it, or the title of this video interested you, I don't think it's a hard sell to encourage teachers to give their students more reading opportunities to develop literacy. We are all about that as teachers. So I don't think it's particularly difficult to understand the argument. There's been just an amazing amount of research that shows that reading is the key. Reading is the key to student success across the board, success on test taking, success in future endeavors. It cuts across all curricular areas, including world language. So us as teachers, we're in the business of teaching reading, especially in world language development. So I wanted to read a few quotes from the great Dr. Stephen Krashen, a great researcher on reading in particular, world language development, world language instruction. Two quotes here that really guide my reading program development are: hands down, the students who read the most are the best at every part of school: reading, writing, researching, content-specific knowledge, all of it. And a second quote from Dr. Krashen: there is massive evidence that self-selected reading, or reading what you want to read, is responsible for most of our literacy development. Readers have better reading ability, know more vocabulary, write better, spell better, and have better control of complex grammatical constructions. In fact, it's impossible to develop high levels of literacy without being a dedicated reader, and dedicated readers rarely have serious problems in reading and writing. To add to that, there is no better practice for reading than more reading. Nothing that you can use as a follow-up activity to a reading activity is better than just more reading. So I would encourage you to get your students in there. I mean, I think that literacy instruction from the teacher in a direct instruction manner has its place in a world language classroom. Teaching syntactical structures, vocabulary, grammar, all of it, that has its place, especially since they're so novice. Even at higher levels, they still need scaffolded instruction. But we need to release them to practice those skills and to develop the skills on their own via a reading program and lots of time with their eyes on the page. We're also shooting for something more. I mean, especially in world language education, where our time is so limited in the classroom. Most students, at least in Virginia, only take 3 years of the language. There's actually no graduation requirement for world language for a standard diploma in the state of Virginia. So our time is precious in the world language classroom. The ultimate goal of an in-class reading program is to pique students' interest in reading so much that the in-class reading program spills over into their personal life. And so if we can achieve that, which is possible, and we can have students checking out books in our target languages to continue reading at home and to continue reading in the future, that's a big win. It's a big win towards lifelong language usage in the target language. There are a number of really great books to read for why you should build a reading program. The SSR handbook by Dr. Janice Pilgreen is absolutely fantastic. One of the best professional books I've ever read. Inspirational. Every page I had annotations in the margins, and I really learned so much. I can't encourage you enough to pick up a copy of the SSR handbook and to read it. In fact, this video and the slideshow that I'll be referencing in the video is built on Dr. Pilgreen's structure for the 8 principles behind successful SSR programs, reading programs in class. Another book is by Donald Miller, The Book Whisperer. This book has gotten a lot of attention in greater society, even outside of education, for how eloquently Donald Miller communicates why kids should be reading, why teachers should be reading, why adults should be reading. It's a beautiful read. Please pick up a copy. And then finally, Mike Pito, a Spanish teacher, has written a book called Pleasure Reading in the World Language Classroom, which takes a lot of the ideas about building a reading program in L1 in your first language and adapts them for your second language study in the world language classroom. It's a beautiful book. It's very informative. So I highly recommend that as well. And the last thing I'll bring up by way of introduction is a quick distinction about the difference between an independent reading program. Sometimes it's called SSR for sustained silent reading. Sometimes it's called FVR for free voluntary reading. Sometimes it's called FCR, free choice reading. All that is independent reading. Students read whatever they want themselves. And whole class novels. This video does not address whole class novels. This is specifically for building a reading program where students read independently. This video is going to be structured in the same way that Dr. Pilgreen's SSR handbook is structured. She noticed when researching successful and unsuccessful reading programs that 8 factors emerged as being essential to running a SSR program. So here are the 8 factors, and our video will follow in this order. The first principle to building an in-class reading program is access. Students have to have access to the books, and it has to be in class. It's not good enough to have the books down in the library. They have to have access every day, easily and quickly. So you can pack the books up after 10 or 15 minutes and continue on with your lesson. Now, the vast majority of your books are going to be books designed and written specifically for world language students, beginner world language students in Spanish or language classes 1 through AP. These books are unique because the authors have controlled for the breadth of vocabulary. So the very basic books use at times less than 100 different words plus obvious cognates so that students with very little language can still understand the story. And as the books advance in sophistication, their distinct vocabulary counts increase, but they're all limited. So in that way, they are definitely more accessible to language learners than literature written for native speakers of the language. There are 2 main publishing houses in the business, the first of which is Fluency Matters here. You go to their webpage, fluencymatters.com, and then you can go to their Fluency Matters store. You can click here on comprehension-based readers, and then all the readers pop up. They have, I don't know, probably close to 100 or so, maybe more. And you can choose language, select for level. You can even select for unique word count. So that would really help in determining what level you're trying to buy books for. And the other publishing house, which has quite a few books, is TPRS Books. And you can check their website out as well. Now, there is a growing body of CI, that is to say, novels designed for beginning world language students or world language classroom students that are not carried by Fluency Matters or by TPRS Books. And my colleague and reading wizard, Mike Pito, has created a blog that helps teachers track all of the independently published authors. The blog is titled cireading.com. And if you scroll down here, really the best resource on this website that I recommend is this massive list of all CI novels, including main publishers, but also independent publishers as well, maintained by Martina Bex and Mike Pito. If you click this open, this catalog of all the books that everybody who does this in their class knows about. So a comprehensive list pops up. It's leveled based off Mike Pito's and Martina Bex's opinion and others' opinions based off word count and vocabulary breadth. It has columns for the type of story and farther to the right where you can buy them and the individual cost even. Here you go. You can click the link even and it delivers you right to the page. The publisher, the cost. It's an amazing resource. It's available for all the languages that there are books published in. So whatever language you are, you can see what's available. Pretty much all of the independent authors' books can be purchased on Amazon. Here I've just typed in one of my favorite independently published books, La Madre Perfecta by Rachel Emery. As soon as you click this open in Amazon, if you scroll down to the frequently bought together or the customers who viewed this item also viewed, you see a whole bunch of other books, the vast majority of which are also designed for use in beginner world language classrooms. So you can click on all these and explore. That's how I find most of the new novels. I just see what's popping up on Amazon. When you first start to create a library in class, I recommend that you purchase novels strategically because, I mean, it's rare that a teacher has $1,000 or $2,000 to drop on 300 books that you're going to need over the course of running a classroom library. So with limited funds, I recommend that you start by buying beginner level books. Now, if you only teach AP Spanish, then you're going to need something different. You're going to need more variety and higher level books. But most teachers teach a variety of level 1, 2, 3, even 4. And if you teach any of the lower levels, level 1 and 2, you're going to want to buy beginner books first because the level 3 and the level 4 and the level 5 and the AP kids, they can read those books too, but not vice versa. So buy the best beginner books to start your library, and only buy one copy of books until you have, 50, 60 books or so. And at that point, you can start buying multiple copies. But the first thing you want to do is you want to create variety of selections. So your students can get a good fit book for their level of literacy and their interest. It's also really important to remember when working with limited funds that not all books are created equal. Not all authors are created equal. Some of them are bad, unfortunately, and some of them are awesome. So at the beginning of purchasing, you want to have as much punch for your dollar. So on my blog here, Comprehensible RVA, just type in Comprehensible RVA, Richmond, Virginia, RVA into Google, and this will pop up. I've got a section devoted to reading and novels on my blog. Here on the drop-down menu, first steps for building a library. I have created kind of a curated list of recommendations. It's for Spanish. A lot of these books have been translated into other languages, so it's still valid in some instances. Here, I mean, I've really broken it down into a couple of different levels. So for super, super duper easy books, really there's just one right now by Terry Waltz. It's a wonderfully easy book, and it's fairly interesting to read. And then, maybe a half step up from that is Eddie El Elefante, one of the best very beginner books out there, wonderfully illustrated by Emily Ibrahim, and a really cute story. And then some favorites within what I would consider good for first reads for most kids, really easy, right? And then we work on up here. You can look at the rest of the list. I've kind of curated what my favorites are and what my students' favorites are at each level. Now, there are other books out there, of course, and there's also books that I haven't read yet. Like I haven't gotten through all of AC Quintero's books, and I think she's a wonderful author. So I'm confident that the rest of her books are going to get on this list. But I haven't read them all, especially upper level books. So we'll see what else makes the list. And this is just my list, but I think it's worth being strategic with your purchases if you don't have enough money to buy them all. Just as there are suggested books to buy, there are also reading materials to avoid. And there are materials that are pitfalls for a lot of teachers and end up, I think, wasting money and wasting students' time and lead to frustration. The first is you should not buy children's literature from your target language culture. First of all, surprisingly, it's going to be too difficult for most students, even upper level students. The breadth of vocabulary used in much children's literature is way too advanced still for even AP students. Strange adjectives, poetic devices. Also for students who are in middle school or high school, children's literature doesn't match the maturity needs that they need. They're written for a more juvenile audience, and they're expensive. So it doesn't fit our needs. It's going to frustrate students because they're not going to be able to understand what's going on. Also, while we're talking about authentic literature, I would avoid anything written and published for native Spanish speakers. Our students are not native Spanish speakers. They have, after level one, between 100 and 150 hours of exposure to Spanish that they can't pick up Harry Potter and start reading Harry Potter. It's going to be a failure. It's going to be frustrating to them. So unless you're teaching AP or heritage language courses, then I think you should avoid authentic literature. What I mean to say is literature published for native speakers of your language. And finally, for the purpose of this video, I recommend avoiding whole class novels or book sets with 5 copies of books. You don't need 5 copies of most books. There might be a handful, 2 or 3 books that you need more than 2 or 3 copies of because they're going to be so popular. There's lots of ways to get money to pay for your library. You definitely don't need to pay out of your own pocket for sure. The most successful approach I have experienced is simply asking parents of my students for donations. At my school, that type of practice is allowed. I don't know about at your school. You should definitely check into that. But every year I get a couple $100, sometimes $500, $600, $700 a year by just sending a letter home saying, hey, would you like to support your child's literacy development in their second language? Parents want to do that. Parents care about reading. They care about their kids reading. So they've been tremendously supportive of building my library. Many other teachers have reported success in getting funding from their parent-student teacher organizations and their administration. I just had a colleague who moved schools because her previous school bought all the other books that she was using. She had to leave those books at that school. But her new principal gave her $850 right off the bat to purchase new books. So you can get a lot of money through a lot of different ways. You just have to be proactive, and you have to ask. Here is the letter I've sent home to parents in the past, I make sure to mention the cost of an individual book on average and the cost of a class set. Just the mere fact of saying that a class set costs $125 on average, even though I don't intend to buy a class set, means that at times I've gotten $125 checks sent my way. So you're free to use this. You're free to make your own version or adapt this however you want. I'll make sure that it's attached to the video. So I thought I'd take you on a little tour of the library in my classroom so that you could get a sense of the layout. I have a couple sections of books. In the front of the classroom here, I have my beginner section. And as you can see, I hang my books on gutters that I have attached to the wall. I'm convinced that this is by far the best way to do it. It's cheap. They're $4 for 10 feet of run. You just get some wall anchors and you drill them in. It's the best way to display the novels by far because the covers are facing out. If you had a bookshelf, for example, like I have a bookshelf over here. If you had a bookshelf and your library was just displayed by your bookshelf, there's a number of problems you're going to have. First off, there's no advertising. Kids can't see, they have to get really close to see the title, and there's no picture for them to make any judgment on, and you're going to have a traffic jam because I have classes of 30, 31, 32 kids, and this is, 3 feet across. 32 kids trying to fit into a 3-foot space every class twice to get their books and to put it back would be a disaster. And browsing is just not going to be nearly as easy. So get yourself some gutters, put them on the wall, and it's beautiful. I love having them right in front of my classroom. Students can see them. Visitors can see them. It is clear. This is a classroom where we read. In the back of the room, I have another couple sections. This wall is a little step up from the beginner section and maybe kind of bridging to intermediate. And then this is the more advanced section, kind of intermediate to advanced, and then advanced to bridging to native, and then actual native books meant for native speakers of the language. Everything has to be organized by level because students, when they browse, they need to know, all right, well, I just finished that book. I'm ready for a little bit more of a challenge. So I'll go in this direction. Or, you know what, I've got to abandon this book because it was too hard, so I've got to go back in this direction. All right? You don't want to have students ask you. You want them to be able to control that themselves. On my bookshelf here, I have, books that I've pulled because I didn't think that they were very good, or I don't have room to display them all, so I have the Harry Potter books here. I only have one Harry Potter book up on the shelf, and if a student is working through the Harry Potters, I'll get them the rest of the books from this bookshelf. I also have the same thing for Diary of a Wimpy Kid and Dork Diary books there. I also, I keep extra books here because colleagues want to borrow books and try them out with students. So that's what I have that bookshelf for. We have just wrapped up the first principle of successful reading programs, access, and we are moving on to appeal. This is an important fundamental practice in SSR programs. You can't just make books available and think that kids are going to want to read. Unfortunately, in the United States, reading is not a popular pastime for a lot of kids. We need to do a lot better job as teachers building reading habits and making reading habits social, reading clubs, and encouraging kids. So you as the teacher are going to have to build excitement for your reading program if you want it to be successful. The easiest way to build excitement about different books is to do what I call book trailers. And it's simply where you as the teacher grab a book that you like, that fits the target audience, class, whatever level you're teaching, and you talk about it. You sell it to the students. You talk about what genre it fits into, what type of reader profile might enjoy this book, who the author is, what other books the author wrote. So if students have read those other books, they might be drawn to this book as well. It's easy. You can do it quickly. It only takes a minute or two. I do it every class at the beginning, right before reading. I do it in English. The point is to build excitement about the reading. The reading is what delivers the target language instruction. And it only takes a minute or two. And I want kids to understand me and to enjoy the experience. So I do it in English. So take a look. I've got an example here. First of all, this is a new book called Bar Quiere un Gato. It's a beginner level book. It's going to go in the beginner section of the library. And it's a first. It's the first book written for language class learners, like level 1, level 2 Spanish learners, that is a choose your own adventure story. Y'all know what I'm talking about with choose your own adventure story? You don't? No. Okay, so choose your own adventure stories are written in a way so like at the end of a page, there's a fork in the road. The character could do this, this, or this. And you get to, as the reader, you get to choose which path the character is going to take, and then you flip to like whatever page the path you choose leads. Yeah, so like the book is not, you can't read the book from cover to cover, front to back. You flip around it, and you can read the book multiple times because there's different versions in the book. So it's cool, yeah. I mean, like a lot of kids' books are written this way. Have you ever read a book in English like that? Yeah, I have. No? All right. Well, a lot of younger audience books written for younger audiences are written this way because it's fun. So this is the first book written for beginner Spanish students that's like that. I highly encourage you to consider it if you think your book's just okay, or when you finish your next book. Another great thing you can do to encourage reading and the enthusiasm for reading in your class amongst your students is to have book chats after reading. I do this maybe once every 2 weeks or so, maybe once every week or so, in which I ask students after we've read to gather around in groups of 3 or 4 students and chat about their books. What are they reading? What do they like about it? What do they not like about it? Who would they recommend it to? Is it a good book? Is it easy? Is it hard? It just moves the reading portion of class from academics to the social realm. And kids need that. Real readers do this. When you're reading a book for fun as part of a pleasure reading habit, you talk to your friends about it. You talk to your colleagues about it. You talk to your significant other about it. It's a great thing to do to move into the social realm with your books. It normalizes the fact that we're all going to read. So kids who think it's not cool at first will grow to become more accustomed to talking about reading and identifying as a reader. And I let them choose their groups. Normally in class, I never let students choose their groups. I just group them wherever they're sitting. But in this situation, sometimes, most of the time, I let them choose their groups because I want them to be talking about their books with their friends. They're going to listen to their friends' recommendations more than others. So right here, I have a video that I taped of an example of some students talking about their books. It's much quieter in this video because I was recording. Usually all these conversations are happening around the room at the same time, and the room's really bursting with energy and excitement and about books. It's a wonderful thing. So this is a little bit more formal than they normally are, but take a look.
Okay, so this is Fiesta Fatale. It's about this girl named Vanessa, and her dad is in a drug cartel, and the cartel finds him and murders him, and so her mom and her have to escape and enter Texas illegally. I like this book because it's a mystery, and that's my favorite genre of book, or maybe really anything. I would suggest this to the whole class. It's a little bit challenging, but it's a good challenge.
I'm reading Brandon.
Can we ask her a question?
Yes. So what made you choose the book in the first place?
Great question. That's a good question for y'all to ask.
Mr. Chonko just kind of told us what it's about, and I took some interest in it. I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. It would be a good book to read, especially for my likings.
What was your favorite part so far?
No spoilers. No endings.
I'd say probably when like Vanessa's mom is like, girl, you need to take off your dress. We can't run with that. Like, you gotta go. And she's like, So.
Why is that your favorite part?
I don't know, cause like I guess kind of reminds me of myself when I was little. Like I would just like do the stupidest things, like things that I know that I shouldn't have done.
All right, cool. I do have a question. Why was the father murdered?
Cause he was undercover as a part of the drug cartel, and they found out, so they murdered him.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm reading Brandon Brown. It's the first of the 3 books, and in my book, he is using his mom's phone to play a game that he's not supposed to be playing. And at the section that I just read today, he stole Jolly Rancher from his sister, and he just got caught because there was red all over his mouth.
Are you reading the same book? I don't want to spoil anything for you because I found part of it.
Okay. All right. A question?
Like, do you like this book, and would you suggest it to others?
Yes, I would suggest it to anybody who's having trouble reading the book that they're reading right now because
So it's like a lower
pretty easy.
like level
Mhm.
of
And the
vocabulary.
dictionary in the book, it's very descriptive. Like there's pretty much every word in the book you can find in the dictionary.
Another question? Alex, do you have a question for him?
What was your favorite part so far, even though you haven't gotten that far?
Honestly, the part that I just read was pretty fun, but if I had to choose something before that, it's when he threw the phone because his mom was coming in and I cried.
Okay, that's your second book, right?
Actually, well, I didn't finish the first one because it was a little bit too challenging.
Yeah.
Like it continued to get harder as I got into the book.
Which
so,
book was that?
That was the 3rd Brandon Brown book, so
Okay.
I'm gonna work my way up to that one.
That's the one about the car?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that one definitely it starts out like that. It's easier, and then it builds harder, for sure. Yeah, cool. All right, thank y'all.
Dr. Pilgreen's third principle of successful SSR programs is encouragement. This is the part of my SSR practice for world languages where I differ the most from Dr. Pilgreen and her research. Her research indicates that the best role for the teacher during the reading period is to model read, to read a book in front of the students, with the students. And in fact, there's substantial evidence, empirical data that yes, students were more interested and they had stronger literacy gains when teachers read alongside the students. I don't disagree that it's a good practice. However, a couple years ago in May, on a whim, I decided to ask students to translate for me. I was curious about how successful they were after a couple months of reading independently. How far had they gotten? How quick were their translations? How accurate were their translations? So I started working with students one-on-one in what's called the workshop model, the reading workshop model. It's a style of reading coaching used in language arts classrooms called reading workshop. And I was disappointed. Many of my students were not accurately reading the text. What I mean to say is they were skimming the text for key vocabulary that jumped out, especially cognates. And then from those data points here and there, they were creating their own narrative. They weren't actually reading the narrative in the target language. That's not good enough. They need to know what every word means in the sentence. I think that's my opinion. I think that's a major difference between reading in L1 and L2. When they pick up a book in L1, they're going to understand all of the glue words, all the ands, all the buts, all the fors, all the becauses. They're gonna know all that stuff because it's basic vocabulary. They might know some they might not know some low frequency words here that are important to that book or are unique to that book. In all levels that I've taught, all the way up from level 1 to level 5, students, it's not taken for granted that students are going to understand all those high frequency words. So I have changed my practice drastically. Instead of model reading, I now coach. I do the reading workshop model where I work one-on-one with students. In 10 to 15 minutes, I can usually work with 3 students or so. So it's quick interaction. And it's a substantial difference from Dr. Pilgreen that I think working with beginner second language students in a reading program, I think it demands it. This is the rubric that I use with my students when I'm coaching them to guide our discussions. It is based off of Tina Hargaden's rubric by the same name, Habits of a Strong Reader rubric. Mine has 2 criteria, one on focus and one on accuracy. Tina's is very similar. She has the focus portion, the stamina portion, and instead of the accuracy portion, she focuses on good fits. You could just Google search Habits of a Strong Reader rubric, Tina Hargaden, if you want to find that. On my rubric, we're going to talk about this section later. This here, the reading focus section. We're going to focus on the accuracy section in reference to encouraging students. So the expectation I have outlined for my students after seeing that they weren't successful on their own in translating word for word, I don't mean translating, but understanding the text word for word, is that they need to do that. They're expected to know how the sentence fits together in terms of the words. How they're interacting in Spanish. They can't just skim for keywords and formulate their own, general idea of what's going on. And I enforce that when I work with students one-on-one. I simply ask them to translate from a recent page, a short, amount, half a paragraph, a couple sentences, and just that 10 or 15 second translation of something that they'd worked through earlier on that class period, that reading period, lets me know if I need to intervene with some coaching strategies. A lot of times with the instruction, with the expectation, students have looked up the words that they need to look up. They've thought about the context to come up with, the unknown vocabulary successfully. And sometimes they fail. Sometimes, their reading is not accurate enough, and that gives me the opportunity to work with that student, either to work on strategies that will succeed or to have a discussion about choosing a more suitable book selection, an easier book selection, so that they can be successful. So here's what that coaching looks like. In this portion of the video, I'm going to show an interaction I had one-on-one with a level 1 student who had been reading for about a month or so, maybe less, maybe a couple weeks or so, working with a Spanish book called Eddie el Elefante, a very basic book, but this is a beginner student, so it's an appropriate challenge for this student. The video starts with me sitting next to the student, quietly, discreetly asking him to translate from a page back that he had read that day. You'll have to listen carefully because it's pretty quiet.
Wants to save Benito, but cannot. She is big and cannot enter the hole. She cannot save Benito.
It already is apparent that this student is reading accurately. He was easily and quickly able to translate a few lines of text. I'm done. He's reading successfully. He's reading with enough attention and effort to make substantial literacy gains. So at this point, since I've only spent 10 or 15 seconds with him, I want to start coaching. So I asked him to flip to his current place in the book to see how it is live, so I can see what he's struggling on or what he's succeeding on.
All right, that's really good. Can you go to where you currently are? I'm on this page. All right, where are you? Okay, so let's do that. Eddie wants to save Benito.
All right, I found my first place where I can coach. He has said a question as a statement. Eddie can save Benito. That's not the correct English. The correct English is can Eddie save Benito. It's just in Spanish, the word order is backwards, for questions. So he's made a mistake there, and I want to see if I can help. So I just simply point out the fact that there's a question mark. That's it. Take a look at the question mark, and let's see what happens.
So how do you make that a question? With the question mark. Eddie. Can Eddie save Benito? Good adjustment.
He nailed it. He just needed a little push. It was a beautiful interaction for me in the moment. It was a special thing to be able to help out and help him realize that question word order in Spanish is backwards to what it is in English. And think about it. All right, multiply that by 3 students every class period for 3 years, and you start to see on aggregate the amount that you can impact literacy gains and comprehension gains in your students if you're coaching. That wasn't happening before when I was model reading under Dr. Pilgreen's recommendations for reading in your native language. It's just different. There's a place for coaching in the second language reading program. One thing you can do with your students to encourage enthusiasm for reading is to talk about the research for why reading is good for them. A lot of students care. You can talk to them about how literacy improves their understanding, their reading ability. It improves test scores. It helps across the board in all their classes. And students, can benefit from that information, and it can motivate some students. Another thing you can do to encourage reading is talk about inspirational reading quotes. Here's a few from my blog. So if you go to comprehensiblerva.wordpress.com, and if you put your mouse over the novels and reading section, I have a post about inspirational reading quotes that I've collected over the years. So I just use these quotes. Sometimes I just read them right before reading, and at times they're profound, and we actually have a short little discussion of a minute or two. And it helps build some appreciation for reading and helps to start change that culture of negativity towards reading towards positivity. Some of these quotes are just absolutely amazing. I love the quote from Frederick Douglass in particular. Where's the Frederick Douglass quote? There it is. Once you learn to read, you will be forever free, by Frederick Douglass, written as he was a slave. The students know who Frederick Douglass is. They know that he was a slave. And so to hear from his mouth, once you learn to read, you will be forever free. To hear that in context is a powerful statement. We've had some really deep discussions about that. Another way to encourage your students in their pursuit of sustained silent reading is to do guided reading lessons, short mini guided reading lessons on a few key topics. In working with students over the years with these novels in this reading program, I've noticed a few trends. First of all, kids need to know that there are glossaries in the books. Reading in English, most of the time there aren't glossaries, and they certainly don't need them most of the times. All of these books have glossaries. So, that's a great resource for students to use. And a note on the glossaries while we're talking about them. Some of the books, not so much the new books, but a lot of the older books have cognates broken out into a separate glossary. So I always tell the kids, if you're looking for a word, double check that there's not 2 lists of words in the back. Here's an example. In this book, it's Brennan Brown versus Yucatan. There's the normal glossary, starts with A, and then at the end, there is a special glossary for cognates. This practice has stopped, fortunately. It confused kids more than, it contributed to anything. So fortunately, I think Fluency Matters has discontinued that practice. There are a few other key guided reading lessons. Kids don't know how to use footnotes. A lot of kids don't, at least. So I always, take a picture of a page with a footnote, talk about what the little, the number behind the word means, and, point their attention towards that, because I noticed working with students, they weren't doing that by themselves, however commonsensical that seems. And then the other big guided reading lesson that I do, I basically only do these three, is using context. Students frequently stop right at the unknown word and get frustrated, look in the glossary or whatever, skip to the next sentence, when what they really should be doing is reading to the end of the sentence, just skipping over the unknown word and building out the context. And if they do that simple strategy, reading to the end of the sentence, a lot of times they can figure out what the new word is. And using the rest of the context. In many of these books, there's pictures. Sometimes there's even arrows, like from a word to the image in the picture that the vocabulary word means. And I just noticed working with students one-on-one that they weren't using the context of the pictures even. So those three mini lessons are really useful to talk to your students about, and anything else that you notice when you're working one-on-one with your students. The final way to encourage your student is to make sure that you, the teacher, are setting a good example. That can mean a number of different things, but it definitely does not mean checking email. You need to be engaged in the reading process. There are really two options. The first option is to read alongside them, to have a book in the target language that you are enjoying and they see you enjoying. The second option I'm going to talk about later on in the video under limited assessment is to coach your students, in which you would work one-on-one with your students, and rotate through the class. But still, even in that situation, you're very much engaged in the reading process. It is going to undercut your efforts if you are not focused on reading. If you're, file copying or touching up your lesson plan, checking email, it's going to be very detrimental. So make sure that you, the teacher, are focused and encouraging that time. The fourth principle in the SSR handbook for successful reading programs is distributing reading over time. In doing an SSR program, students show more growth in their reading skill over time if they read on a regular basis, not massed in one big chunk. So that means that on a weekly basis, if you're reading an hour, that you break that hour up over all of the classes you see them in, instead of doing it all on Friday. You can look into the research more in terms of why this is more beneficial, but cognitively, I'm not sure why it'd be more beneficial. However, in terms of developing a reading habit, of course it's more beneficial because, it's on a consistent basis, and it's that consistent basis that hopefully has spillover effects. So if we get kids hooked on books on a regular basis, hopefully they start taking them home and then start developing a reading habit in their personal time, which is the real goal. So distributed time is just that. Do it every class. That's what I recommend. Do it every class for between 5 and 20 minutes. For the beginning of the year, I start out real short time period to build their stamina with 5 minutes, 6, and then 7, and then 8, and then 9. And then depending on the maturity level and the feeling in the room, we top out usually somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes for my high schoolers. For honors classes, they can usually take a little bit longer. So we're definitely up there towards 15 minutes. And for upper level classes, I teach Spanish 4, Spanish, and Spanish 5 as well. Those classes, we're pushing 20 minutes, sometimes over 20 minutes a class. Every class. I see them every other day on the 90-minute block. So 20 minutes out of the 90 minutes in an upper level class. So, it's the most important time. The books teach them way better than I can teach them. I'm convinced, based on the development of this reading program over the years. They make huge strides. So I never miss it. We do it every class. The fifth principle is establishing a conducive environment. And what that means, obviously, is making sure that the room is quiet, peaceful, that students are focused, that there are minimal distractions to no distractions, and doing whatever it takes to enforce that so that it's a reality for students. That there's no side talking, there's no going to the bathroom, there's no disruptions, nobody gets up for anything. We're in it, and it's going to be silent, and people are going to be focused. Now, I found that it's best to, it's most successful to achieve that type of purity of environment if you have a rubric that grades them accordingly. So here I'm going to screenshot the rubric that I use to those, to that end. I have two criteria. The one that we're considering right now is the top criteria: stamina and focus on reading. So I've got some descriptions here that make sure, kids are doing what they need to do, and it's silent and it's focused. You're welcome to copy this, adjust it, however you need. Students self-assess. I have them self-assess. They just write the date. They write their grade based on how they think they did. And then I write teacher comments if I disagree. I don't grade the rubrics every class period or even every week. I grade them as needed, maybe once every 3 weeks or 4 weeks, if I feel like a kid needs to get a message or so. And I use this chart on a regular basis. Each class period, I write the date at the top, and I have the roster printed on the spreadsheet. And I just make little annotations if I've worked with a student. And then I mark X's for distraction or disruption. And then when I'm grading, via the rubric, I can look back over this chart, and then I can grade accordingly. In creating a conducive environment, it's also valuable to have a procedure that's habit to keep order. So for my classes, as soon as I've launched the reading program, the bell ringer that was projected on the board becomes the reading program. So when students enter in the classroom, they individually and independently, right off the bat, before they even take their seat, grab their book, and then settle down and get ready to read once the bell rings. Then when the bell rings, there's no talking. I take roll silently on my computer. Students are already reading. Students just know, they get into the habit that they read at the beginning of the class. And so it's really peaceful. We start the class with 10 to 15 minutes of silence, of focus on our books. And that habit is really valuable. It helps keep order. It's also useful at the end of reading time to have a set procedure. It's pretty disruptive for all the students to get up and put their books back. So I hire librarians, 2 to 3, depending on your class size. And students pass their books to these designated students who have an appreciation for order, and want to make things look nice. And everybody else stays seated. I go on with my lesson while the 2 or 3 students take a couple minutes to straighten up and put the books back. These students take pictures of the library with the books in the correct order. So if they have any questions about where books go, especially for books that only have one copy, so there's not another copy for them to just put additional copies back on top of, so they can reference that photo. That really cuts down on distraction because having 30 kids get up to put their books back after 10 or 15 minutes of reading and then try to get them all settled back down would be a disaster. So hire yourself some librarians. It's a great job and the kids love it. All right, we are moving right along to Dr. Pilgreen's 6th pillar of successful reading programs, which is non-accountability. A lot of teachers are going to struggle with not holding students accountable for their reading. It's in our blood. We want to make sure that students are living up to expectations, that they're succeeding. But the research indicates that when it comes to sustained silent reading programs, the best programs do not grade their students on the reading. They don't grade their students at all, which creates an environment in which the intrinsic value of reading is developed in the students. And that's what we really want, because the whole point of in-class reading programs, other than the obvious literacy gains, is to have students get so engrossed in a book that they check the book out from you, and that they take it home, and that they start forming a pleasure reading habit in their free time. And hopefully that catalyzes via great books, real home run books that grab a hold of a kid. Hopefully it catalyzes into a real reading habit, which forms lifelong reading. I know that's a big ask, but placing accountability measures on students diminishes the intrinsic value and the development of intrinsic interest in reading. That being said, you've already seen that I have a very small accountability measure via that rubric. And in working with students over the last 3.5 years, I feel pretty strongly that beginner students, even advanced students, for high school, level 4 or 5 AP kids, reading in their second language is fundamentally different than Dr. Pilgreen's research into reading in a native language. Students, even at young ages in their native languages, they have vocabularies of thousands of words. Our students in our L2 languages just don't have that. And so this is a major constraint. In a student's L1, they can fall in love with a plot, with a storyline, with a character, so much more easily than when they're working vocabulary in a foreign language is 200 words, 300 words, 400 words. The books just aren't as compelling as the Harry Potter series. They're just not as good. When you get into more sophisticated books, more advanced books in the library, the storylines really start to thicken. They start to become much more compelling. So students can really get caught up in them. And I do have students get caught up in books to the point where they ask to take them home and check them out. So it is possible. I'm just saying, in general, I think students benefit from a slight accountability measure. Dr. Pilgreen's 7th principle of successful SSR programs is follow-up activities. We have already spoken about follow-up activities in the video I showed you of the book chat, which is also an encouraging factor. What Dr. Pilgreen doesn't mean by follow-up activities is quizzes and tests and reading journals. All of that stuff that gets tacked onto reading programs so often is just tedium to students. So I would recommend that any follow-up activities that you use with your students serve the purpose of increasing excitement and moving reading into the social realm so that students can connect over books and recommend books. That's basically it. And the last principle of SSR programs is staff training. I think we can check that off now. By way of conclusion, I just want to remind you that the 3 books that I really drew upon for inspiring and directing my reading program are the SSR handbook that I've constantly referenced, but also Donald Miller's The Book Whisperer and Mike Peto's Pleasure Reading in the World Language Classroom. Please do go check those out. They're wonderful. Thanks for watching my video. Once again, I'm Brett Chanko, and I hope that this helps you in your teaching practice and you find a lot of satisfaction and that your kids really improve in their literacy and in their world language ability. Finally, if you want to learn more about how I run my reading program, I would direct you to my blog at comprehensiblerva.wordpress.com. On the side, in the categories section, you can click on reading program, and I go into, if you can believe it, a lot more detail about how I built my reading program and the minutia of how to make it work great. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you. The final principle is simply staff training, which I'm pretty sure you can check off now.